After 10 years in silence, the human ship returned as a legend. The void whispered with voices that shouldn't exist. Captain Zoe Miles stood on the bridge of the U.S. Prometheus, watching the swirling darkness beyond their viewports pulse with an intelligence that made her enhanced neural implants ache. 10 years. 10 years since they'd crossed into this realm that existed between the spaces of reality, where the laws of physics bent like broken promises and time flowed backward through crystalline streams of pure thought. "Captain!" called out Chief Navigator Sakura Morimoto from his station, his voice carrying the same otherworldly resonance that had marked all their voices since the transformation. "We're approaching the dimensional gateway. Earth's solar system is different than when we left." Different was an understatement. Through the Prometheus's enhanced sensors, Zoe could see what had become of human space. Where once peaceful trade routes had connected the inner colonies, now massive fortress stations bristled with weapons that could crack planets in half. Defense grids surrounded every habitable world, their energy signatures screaming of desperation and barely contained terror. The space around Earth looked like a wound in reality itself. Massive defensive platforms orbited the blue world in perfect geometric patterns, their surfaces covered with weapon arrays that could destroy entire fleets. Shield generators the size of small moons created overlapping barriers of energy that turned the entire solar system into an impenetrable fortress. 10 years of silence, whispered Dr. Lyra Voss from the science station, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that showed impossible geometries. "They must think we're dead. They must think the Devourers won. The Devourers." Even the name sent ripples of primal fear through the bridge crew. Ancient beings from the space between galaxies, entities that fed on the collapse of civilizations by turning their greatest achievements into weapons of self-destruction. They didn't conquer worlds. They convinced entire species to destroy themselves from within. Zoe remembered the day they'd first encountered evidence of the Devourers. The Prometheus had been on a routine deep space exploration mission, investigating ancient ruins on a dead world in the Kepler system. The artifacts they'd found there had been unlike anything in human databases. Crystalline structures that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions, covered with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Then the accident happened. Dr. Voss had been studying one of the larger artifacts when it suddenly activated, creating a tear in space-time that pulled the entire ship into a dimension that existed between the normal universe and something else entirely. They'd found themselves in a realm where thoughts had physical weight, where memories could be touched and worn like clothing, where the very concept of impossibility was just another variable to be manipulated. It was there that they'd met the Watchers. The Watchers were beings that had once been physical, like humans, but had evolved beyond the need for bodies or even coherent individual identity. They existed as pure consciousness, observing the rise and fall of civilizations across cosmic history. They had been watching the Devourers for millions of years, studying their methods, learning their patterns, waiting for a species that might be able to break the cycle. The Watchers had shown them things that no human mind should have been able to comprehend. They'd revealed the true nature of the Devourers, not as conquerors or destroyers, but as cosmic immune systems that activated when civilizations became too successful, too stable, too permanent. The Devourers saw advanced civilizations as a kind of infection in the universe, and their purpose was to reset galactic development back to primitive levels. But the Watchers had also shown them something else. In all their eons of observation, they had never encountered a species quite like humanity. Most civilizations followed predictable patterns. They grew, they advanced, they became static, they fell. Humans were different. Humans had a unique capacity for what the Watchers called constructive impossibility. The ability to find solutions where none should exist, to create hope in hopeless situations, to work together when cooperation defied all logic. The Watchers had spent 10 years teaching the crew of the Prometheus how to harness this uniquely human trait. They'd enhanced their minds, their bodies, their very souls with technologies that existed in the spaces between atoms. They'd shown them how to build machines that ran on hope instead of energy, how to create weapons that grew stronger through cooperation rather than conflict, how to navigate the quantum foam that underlied all reality. Most importantly, they had taught them how to fight the Devourers. "Incoming transmission," announced Communications Officer Raven Torres, her enhanced hearing picking up signals across 17 different dimensional frequencies. It's Admiral Phoenix Chen from Seoul Defense Command. She sounds terrified," Zoe finished. She remembered Phoenix from the Academy. Brilliant, unshakable, the kind of officer who could stare down a supernova without blinking. Phoenix had been her mentor during her early years, the one who taught her that the mark of a true leader wasn't the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. If Phoenix Chen was afraid, then humanity was in deeper trouble than they'd imagined. The transmission crackled to life, and Phoenix's face appeared on the main screen. She looked older, much older, with lines of stress etched deep around her eyes and streaks of premature gray in her black hair. Her uniform was different too. Gone were the clean lines of the Exploration Corps, replaced by the harsh angles of military armor designed for extended combat operations. When she saw Zoe, her expression shifted from suspicion to shock to something approaching desperate hope. "Zoe Miles," Phoenix said, and her voice nearly broke. "Tell me you're real. Tell me you're not another one of their illusions." "We're real, Phoenix," Zoe replied, though she wasn't entirely sure what real meant anymore after 10 years in a dimension where thoughts could reshape matter and memories could be worn like clothing. "We're coming home." "Home?" Phoenix's laugh was bitter, the sound of someone who had seen too much and lost too many. "There is no home, Zoe. There's only the fortress we built around what's left of our species. The Devourers, they didn't attack us with ships or weapons. They attacked us with ourselves." The screen shifted to show images that made Zoe's enhanced heart skip several beats. Colony worlds where humans fought brutal civil wars over resources that had been abundant just years before. Space stations where paranoia had turned neighbors into enemies, where families had been torn apart by suspicions that everyone else was a Devourer infiltrator. Research facilities where scientists had destroyed their own work rather than risk it being used against humanity. Most disturbing of all were the images from Earth itself. The planet that had once been the shining center of human civilization was now locked behind defensive barriers that kept its own people trapped as much as they kept invaders out. Cities were divided into sectors, each one suspicious of the others. The global government had collapsed into a collection of warring city-states, each convinced that the others had been compromised by alien influence. "They made us afraid," Phoenix continued, her voice heavy with the weight of a decade's worth of failures. "Afraid of each other, afraid of progress, afraid of the very things that made us human. Every colony that tried to expand was consumed by internal conflicts. Every research station that made a breakthrough was destroyed by sabotage from within. They're killing us by making us kill themselves." Zoe felt the familiar presence of her crew through the neural link that connected them all. After 10 years of existing as a single consciousness with multiple bodies, they could communicate without words, share thoughts and emotions across the quantum foam that connected all minds. Right now, she could feel their shock, their horror, their growing determination to set things right. Chief Engineer Dante Reeves looked up from his console, his cybernetic eye glowing with data streams that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. "Captain, I'm reading massive quantum distortions throughout this entire sector. The Devourers haven't just been attacking our colonies, they've been rewriting the fundamental laws of physics to make cooperation impossible and conflict inevitable." Dr. Voss activated her analysis systems, technologies that the crew had learned to build during their decade in impossible space. Her instruments could detect things that existed in the spaces between reality, measure the quantum substrate that determined whether civilizations rose or fell, analyze the probability matrices that governed the behavior of entire species. "The quantum signatures are clear," she reported, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned to read the universe like a book. "They've been seeding reality itself with what I can only call despair particles. Subatomic structures that amplify negative emotions and suppress hope at the molecular level. Every human thought, every human emotion, every human decision is being influenced by quantum fields designed to promote fear and isolation. That's why the defenses," realized Security Chief Axel Storm, his tactical implants processing threat patterns that spanned multiple universes. Humanity isn't preparing for an external attack. They're trying to contain the psychological contagion that's been spreading through human space. The more Zoe studied the defensive structures around Earth, the more she understood the true scope of humanity's predicament. The weapons weren't pointed outward, they were pointed inward, designed to prevent human populations from spreading beyond their designated areas. The shield generators weren't protecting Earth from alien invasion. They were containing the planet's population to prevent the spread of what the authorities believed was alien mental contamination. "Phoenix," she said, her voice carrying new harmonics that seemed to resonate through dimensions. "We need to talk. But first, there's something you need to understand about what we've become." "What you've become?" Phoenix's eyes narrowed, and Zoe could see the suspicion that had become second nature to humanity's leaders. "Zoe, you've been gone for 10 years. We assumed you were destroyed when the Prometheus vanished during the deep space exploration mission. Now you show up in a ship that doesn't match any known configuration, speaking with voices that sound like they're coming from inside my head. How do I know you're not another Devourer trick?" It was a fair question. Zoe had seen enough of the Devourer's illusions during their time in the Void to understand Phoenix's caution. The entities were masters of deception, capable of creating false memories, phantom sensations, even entire fictional realities that felt completely real to their victims. "We weren't destroyed," said Tactical Officer Nova Singh, her consciousness partially existing in the ship's quantum matrix. "We were evolved. The beings we met in the Void, they're older than galaxies, Phoenix. They've watched the Devourers destroy thousands of civilizations across cosmic history." "The Watcher showed us things," added Weapons Specialist Rex Carter, his neural interface allowing him to control armaments that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "They taught us how the Devourers operate, how they turn species against themselves, how they've been doing it for millions of years. But they also taught us something else, how to fight back." Phoenix's image flickered as the quantum distortions around Earth interfered with the transmission. "What are you talking about? What did they do to you?" Zoe felt the weight of explanation settling on her shoulders. How could she explain 10 years of impossible experiences to someone who had been trapped in a reality where hope itself had become a weapon turned against humanity? "They showed us how to think in ways that the Devourers can't predict or manipulate," she began. "They gave us technology that runs on hope instead of fear, weapons that grow stronger through cooperation rather than conflict. Most importantly, they taught us that the Devourers have a weakness. They can't comprehend the specific type of stubbornness that makes humans refuse to accept defeat even when defeat is inevitable." "That's impossible," Phoenix said, but her voice carried a note of desperate longing. "The Devourers have been destroying civilizations for millions of years. If there was a weakness, someone would have found it by now." "Someone did find it," Dr. Voss said quietly. "The Watchers found it. But they never acted on it because they're too logical, too removed from physical existence. They could see the solution, but they couldn't implement it because implementation required something they'd evolved beyond. The ability to believe in impossible things." Navigator Morimoto activated the ship's new scanning systems, revealing the true scope of the Devourer influence. "Captain, I'm detecting their presence throughout the entire solar system. They're not physical entities. They exist as quantum viruses in the information substrate of reality itself." The display showed a three-dimensional map of human space, but instead of the familiar patterns of planets and stars, it revealed something far more disturbing. Every human world was surrounded by clouds of quantum corruption, fields of structured despair that influenced every thought and emotion of the people living there. The effect was strongest around Earth, where decades of accumulated fear had created a kind of negative energy that fed back on itself, growing stronger with each passing day. "They're turning human nature against itself," Engineer Reeves explained, his fingers dancing across controls that manipulated energies borrowed from the dreams of sleeping stars. "Our competitiveness becomes destructive rivalry. Our caution becomes paralyzing fear. Our individual strength becomes isolating paranoia. It's brilliant, in a terrifying way." "The beauty of it," said Communications Officer Torres, her voice carrying the bitter admiration of someone who had studied the enemy for 10 years, "is that they don't need to maintain active control. Once they've seeded a civilization with despair particles, the effect becomes self-sustaining. Every act of fear or isolation creates more quantum corruption, which causes more fear and isolation, which creates more corruption. It's a perfect feedback loop. Phoenix's transmission stabilized, and Zoe could see the Admiral processing this information with the same analytical mind that had made her one of humanity's greatest strategic thinkers. If what you're saying is true, then conventional military resistance is worse than useless. Every defense we build, every weapon we deploy, just gives them more material to work with. Exactly, Zoe said. Every fortress you build makes humans more isolated from each other. Every weapon you deploy makes them more afraid of their neighbors. Every security measure you implement makes them more suspicious of the people they should be trusting. The Devourers have turned our survival instincts into a weapon against our own species. Then how do we fight them? Phoenix asked. How do you fight an enemy that uses your own nature against you? By becoming something they've never encountered before, Zoe replied. The Watchers taught us that the Devourers base their entire strategy on predictable responses to fear and scarcity. They've seen the same patterns repeated across millions of civilizations. When faced with an existential threat, species either surrender or fight, and both responses lead to the same result: self-destruction. But humans are different, added Security Chief Storm with a grin that seemed to exist in 4 dimensions. We specialize in doing things that shouldn't work, believing in things that shouldn't be possible, and finding ways to succeed when success defies all logic. Phoenix stared at them for a long moment. You're talking about more than just fighting the Devourers. You're talking about changing what humanity is. The Watchers showed us something, Dr. Voss said. Every species that faces the Devourers has a choice. They can let fear make them smaller, or they can let hope make them larger. Most species choose fear because it seems safer, more logical. But humans? Tactical Officer Singh asked with a smile that could have illuminated nebulae. Humans choose hope, Zoe finished. Even when hope seems impossible, especially when hope seems impossible. The explanation seemed to resonate with something deep in Phoenix's expression. For a moment, the lines of stress around her eyes softened, and Zoe could see a glimpse of the woman she'd known at the academy, the one who had always believed that any problem could be solved if you just refused to give up. Show me, Phoenix said simply. Zoe nodded to her crew, and the Prometheus began to demonstrate capabilities that shouldn't have been possible. The ship's hull started to glow with patterns of light that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions, creating geometric forms that were beautiful rather than threatening. Instead of weapons charging, the ship's systems began broadcasting something that could only be described as pure, concentrated hope. The effect was immediate and visible. On Phoenix's tactical displays, the quantum distortions throughout the solar system began to weaken. The despair particles that had been corrupting human space for a decade started to transform into something else. Particles that enhanced cooperation instead of suppressing it, that amplified hope instead of fear, that made humans remember why they had learned to trust each other. My God, Phoenix whispered as reports flooded in from stations and colonies throughout human space. What is that? It's what we learned from the Watchers, Dr. Voss explained. The Devourers feed on despair, but they're vulnerable to its opposite. Not just optimism or courage, but the specific kind of hope that humans generate when we refuse to accept that problems are unsolvable. Communications Officer Torres monitored the effects spreading outward from the Prometheus. Captain, I'm reading responses from across the system. The paranoia fields are breaking down. People are remembering why they trusted each other. On Phoenix's screen, status reports were flooding in from across human space. Civil conflicts were pausing as people looked up from their fights and wondered why they'd been fighting. Research teams were reconvening to share discoveries they'd been hoarding out of fear. Families separated by suspicion were reaching out to each other across the void. Most remarkably, the defensive installations around Earth were beginning to change. Weapons that had been pointed inward were rotating to face outward. Shield generators that had been designed to contain human populations were reconfiguring themselves to protect them. The fortress that humanity had built around itself was transforming into something else, a launching pad for expansion instead of a prison for containment. It's not just psychological, Engineer Reeves noted, his instruments detecting changes in the fundamental structure of local spacetime. The quantum substrate of local space is literally changing. The despair particles are being transformed into something else, particles that enhance cooperation instead of suppressing it. Phoenix stared at the readings in amazement. How is this possible? Because the Devourers made a fundamental error, Zoe explained. They assumed that all intelligent species would respond to their influence in predictable ways. They based their entire strategy on the idea that fear and scarcity would always overcome hope and cooperation. But humans are stubborn, added Security Chief Storm. We're the species that looked at the impossibility of faster-than-light travel and decided to invent it anyway. We're the species that saw the vastness of space and decided to explore it. We're the species that faced extinction and decided to spread to other worlds just to spite the universe. Navigator Morimoto highlighted areas on the system map where the effect was spreading fastest. The transformation is accelerating, Captain. Every human who remembers how to hope is strengthening the field. It's creating a cascade effect. A cascade effect that the Devourers can't stop, Dr. Voss added. Because the more they try to suppress it, the more stubborn humans become about maintaining it. They're fighting against the very thing that makes us human, our refusal to accept that anything is truly impossible. Phoenix was now receiving reports from across human space of phenomena that defied explanation. Ancient research projects were suddenly yielding breakthrough results as scientists remembered how to share information instead of hoarding it. Colonies that had been on the verge of collapse were finding abundant resources in places they'd never thought to look. Most importantly, humans were remembering how to work together instead of just surviving alone. The Luna Research Station just reported a breakthrough in quantum computing, Phoenix said, reading from her displays. They say they figured out how to build processors operate on hope-enhanced particles. Mars Colony is reporting that their atmospheric processors are working at 300% efficiency. The asteroid mining operations are finding rare elements in quantities that shouldn't be possible. That's what happens when you remove the quantum corruption, explained weapons specialist Carter. Humans are naturally innovative, naturally cooperative, naturally determined to solve problems. The Devourers have been suppressing those traits for a decade. Now that the suppression is lifting, humanity is remembering what it's capable of. But even as the positive effects spread throughout human space, the Prometheus's sensors were detecting something else. Massive entities moving in the deep space beyond the outer planets, beings of pure despair and dissolution heading toward the solar system with the patience of cosmic forces. The Devourers themselves, Phoenix said, her tactical displays showing shapes that hurt to look at directly. They're coming! Zoe felt the familiar weight of command settle on her shoulders, but it was different now, heavier, more complex, carrying the responsibility of knowledge that no human had ever possessed before. Through the neural link, she could feel her crew's determination, their absolute refusal to let humanity fall to the same fate that had claimed so many other civilizations. Let them come, she said, and her voice carried the confidence of someone who had learned to navigate impossible spaces. The Watchers taught us something else, Phoenix. The Devourers aren't invincible. They're just very, very old. And old things sometimes forget that younger things can surprise them. Dr. Voss was already preparing systems that existed in the spaces between atoms. The quantum hope field will give us advantages they've never had to deal with before. Every human who refuses to despair makes their reality manipulation powers weaker. And every human who chooses to work together instead of fighting alone makes our capabilities stronger, Engineer Reeves added, his fingers dancing across controls that channeled energies from the quantum foam itself. Phoenix looked at the approaching threat, and then at the impossible ship that had once been humanity's most advanced deep space explorer. What do you need from us? Everything, Zoe said simply, but not your weapons or your defenses. We need your hope, Phoenix. We need every human in the system to remember what we're capable of when we refuse to give up. And if they won't listen? Zoe's smile was pure human stubbornness mixed with cosmic wisdom. Then we'll show them. The Prometheus didn't return from the void as a warship, Phoenix. We returned as proof that impossible things are just things humans haven't accomplished yet. The first of the Devourer entities entered the outer edge of the solar system, and reality itself began to bend around their presence. Space twisted into knots of despair, time flowed backward through pools of liquid hopelessness, and the very concept of cooperation began to fray at the quantum level. But in response, the field generated by the Prometheus and amplified by every human who remembered how to hope pushed back with something the Devourers had never encountered. The specific type of stubborn optimism that made humans look at impossible odds and say, "Challenge accepted." Beginning final approach to Earth, Navigator Morimoto announced. All stations report ready for Operation Impossible. Operation Impossible? Phoenix asked. The Watchers had a name for what we're about to attempt, Zoe explained. They called it Teaching Despair to Hope. It's never been tried before because no species has ever been crazy enough to think it could work. But humans? Humans specialize in being crazy enough, the entire bridge crew said in unison, their voices harmonizing across dimensions in a way that made the very fabric of space-time ring like a bell. As the Prometheus approached Earth, the quantum field it was generating began to resonate with the hope-enhanced particles that were now spreading throughout human space. The effect was extraordinary. Every human who chose cooperation over conflict, every human who chose hope over despair, every human who chose to work together instead of fighting alone was adding their strength to the field. But the Devourers were not passive observers. As they felt their influence weakening, they began to actively fight back, sending waves of pure despair toward Earth, trying to overwhelm the hope field with concentrated negativity. The battle that followed was unlike anything in the recorded history of warfare. It was fought not with weapons or ships, but with ideas and emotions, with the fundamental forces that determined whether civilizations rose or fell. The Devourers threw everything they had at humanity: fear, despair, isolation, the crushing weight of cosmic insignificance. But humanity threw something back that the Devourers had never experienced: the stubborn refusal to accept defeat, the insistence that problems were meant to be solved, the absolute determination to find hope in hopeless situations. Captain, Communications Officer Torres reported, I'm receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. Other species are detecting the quantum disturbances. They're asking what's happening. Tell them, Zoe said, that humanity is doing what humans do best, finding a way to win when winning should be impossible. The battle raged for hours, fought in dimensions that existed between the spaces of normal reality. The Devourers had never encountered resistance like this. Instead of breaking under the weight of their despair, humans were using it as fuel for their determination. Instead of being crushed by the impossibility of their situation, they were treating it as just another problem to be solved. Slowly, incredibly, the tide began to turn. The quantum field generated by human hope was not just resisting the Devourer's influence. It was transforming it, converting despair into determination, fear into curiosity, isolation into the driving need to connect with others. They're weakening, Dr. Voss reported, her instruments detecting changes in the Devourer's quantum structure. The hope field is affecting them at the subatomic level. They're not just being defeated, they're being changed. Changed how? Phoenix asked. They're remembering what they used to be, Zoe realized. Before they became entities of pure despair, they were something else. The Watchers showed us glimpses of their history. They were once a species like any other, but they were corrupted by their own fear of cosmic insignificance. The largest of the Devourer entities suddenly stopped its advance toward Earth. For the first time in millions of years, it was experiencing something it had forgotten: hope. Not the hope of conquest or domination, but the simple hope that things could be different, that the cycle of destruction and despair could be broken. Incoming transmission, Torres announced. It's from the Devourer entity. It's trying to communicate. The voice that came through the speakers was ancient beyond measure, carrying the weight of eons of despair and the faint growing light of rediscovered hope. We remember, the voice said. We remember what we were before the darkness. We remember hope. Then remember what you could be again, Zoe replied. The universe is vast enough for both hope and despair, for both creation and destruction. But it doesn't have to be trapped in cycles of inevitable doom. The transformation that followed was visible across multiple dimensions. The Devourer entities were changing, their forms of pure despair becoming something else. Beings that could exist in the spaces between hope and fear, between creation and destruction, between the possible and the impossible. The quantum signatures are stabilizing, Dr. Voss reported. The despair particles throughout human space are transforming into something neutral. Particles that enhance whatever emotions humans choose to feel, rather than forcing them to feel despair. Phoenix stared at the readings in amazement. You've done it! You've actually done it. You've turned the Devourers into... what? Partners, Zoe said simply. Beings that can help civilizations maintain the balance between growth and stability, between progress and caution. The universe needs both order and chaos, both hope and healthy fear. The Devourers can be the force that prevents civilizations from becoming too static, while hope-enhanced humans can be the force that prevents them from becoming too chaotic. The transformation was complete. The Devourer entities, no longer entities of pure despair, took up positions throughout the galaxy, not as destroyers, but as guardians, watching for civilizations that had become too static and gently nudging them toward growth, while hope-enhanced humans spread throughout the universe, helping other species find the balance between caution and courage. Status report, Zoe requested. All human colonies are reporting normal operations, Navigator Morimoto announced. No, better than normal. Productivity is up 400% across the board. New research projects are being initiated on every world. The Lunar Research Station is reporting breakthrough discoveries in quantum physics that they're sharing freely with every other research facility. The asteroid mining operations have found enough rare elements to supply the entire human sphere for centuries, added Engineer Reeves. Mars Colony is reporting that their atmospheric processors are working so efficiently that they'll have a breathable atmosphere in 5 years instead of 50. Most importantly, said Communications Officer Torres, humans are talking to each other again. Families separated by a decade of fear are reuniting. Colonies that had been isolated are reopening trade routes. The entire species is remembering how to work together. Phoenix's face on the screen showed an expression that Zoe hadn't seen in 10 years. Genuine, unguarded hope. What happens now? Now we do what humans do best, Zoe replied. We explore, we discover, we find new problems to solve and new impossibilities to make possible. The galaxy is vast, Phoenix, and we've only seen a tiny fraction of it. And the Devourers? The former Devourers will help us, Dr. Voss said. They know the locations of every civilization in the galaxy, the patterns that lead to stagnation, the signs that indicate when a species needs guidance rather than destruction. They'll be our partners in maintaining the balance between order and chaos. It's not going to be easy, Zoe warned. Humanity has been changed by this experience. We're not the same species that left Earth 10 years ago. We have capabilities that no human has ever possessed, responsibilities that no human has ever carried. We're going to have to learn how to use them wisely. But we'll figure it out, Phoenix said, and her voice carried the same confidence that had made her one of humanity's greatest leaders. We always do. Yes, Zoe agreed, we always do. As the Prometheus took its place in the fleet of ships that would carry humanity to the stars, Zoe looked back at Earth one last time. The blue world was no longer surrounded by defensive fortresses. Instead, it was surrounded by launching platforms, research stations, and the infrastructure of a species that had remembered how to hope. The void no longer whispered with voices that shouldn't exist. Now it sang with the voices of a species that had learned to turn impossibility into possibility, despair into hope, and the end of all things into the beginning of everything new. Humanity had returned from the darkness not as the same species that had left, but as something greater. A species that had learned to teach the universe itself how to hope. The Prometheus had gone into the void as an exploration vessel. It had returned as a legend, carrying with it the proof that no problem was truly unsolvable, no situation was truly hopeless, and no species was truly alone in the vast waiting universe. And in the depths of space, where once there had been only the cold certainty of entropy and despair, now there was something else, the warm, persistent glow of hope, spreading outward from a small blue world where a stubborn species had looked at the impossible, and decided to make it possible anyway. The legend had returned, and with it, the promise that as long as humans existed, the universe would never run out of surprises.